in Photoshop, and I'm just going to go through it, like a small handful of them, probably not even 5, just because there are some that are more heavily used than others, and I think going through every single one of them is kind of overkill a little bit. So there's 3 or 4 that if you know how to use those, you can do any color correction that you need to do. So, like I said, I had put on Brightspace, if you want to work along with this. Where are they at? I uploaded under in-class material, color correction. This is a zip file. You can download that if you want. It has the images that I'm going to work with here. So, jump back over here, grab my, is that it? This is it. All right. So we're going to look at several different things. I'm going to start with the simplest one, but I've got an alternate way of doing it that I want to show you. So if I grab, let's see here, which image is this? That's the one I want. So I'm going to grab this image and drop it into Photoshop. So I've got this city image. And what I want to do is this, the first thing I'm going to do is convert a color photo to a grayscale image. And there's the way everybody does it, and then there's the way that's the better way of doing it that gives you much more control over the results you get. So to change color space on any image, really all you need to do is go to the image menu to mode, and we can convert to CMYK here, and we can also convert to grayscale. So if we convert to grayscale, literally what Photoshop is going to do is trash every single bit of color information and do its best, do the best that it knows how to actually convert that to a grayscale image. So it's an automated process, you know? And when we do that, this is the image we get right off the bat, which actually, this particular image looks fairly decent on a straight conversion, but not all images have that kind of contrast. So the first way of doing it is quite simply image, mode, convert to grayscale image. And that's what most people do, and they kind of leave it at that. But I'm going to do it differently, and I'm going to look at it 2 different ways. So I'm going to undo that, so I've got my color image back. And when it comes to color correction, there are several different places we can get our color, all of our color adjustment options from in Photoshop. One is up under the image menu, under adjustments, we've got all of these different options. This is kind of the worst place to get them from, because using them from the image menu is a completely destructive action. Whenever I apply the color adjustment from here, I don't get a layer in my layer menu that I can modify after I've made my change. So, you know, if I choose, I'll choose hue saturation, and I'm going to shift the color and say OK. I've modified my original image. I don't have an option over here that if I decide, you know what, that color combination absolutely sucks. I mean, right now I can hit Command Z, but in about 10 minutes, I'm not going to be able to undo that. So it's not really the way we want to apply a color correction. The only time it's good is if I'm in, let me undo that. The only time it's good is if I'm in a channel, and let's say I want to make an alpha channel out of, or an alpha mask out of my green channel. I can duplicate this channel, call this my alpha channel. And then if I want to make an adjustment to this, I need to make some tonal adjustments, like lighten the dark areas maybe, or something to that effect. I can't apply an adjustment layer to this channel to make those adjustments. So I've got really no choice but to, with this channel selected, going up here to my image menu, adjustments, and choosing my levels, say, and brightening up that channel or doing whatever I need to do to make that alpha channel. I could darken my blacks down a little bit. Maybe I want to blow out the whites for some odd reason. I don't know. I can do that, but then I've modified that channel directly. So that's about the only time we actually use the adjustments out of the image menu. Do all of that, back to where I was. What we do want to do, though, is get it from one of two places, either within the standard layout or essentials layout that I'm using. Yeah, essentials layout. There's a tab right next to my properties tab called adjustments that has all those same options. And I've also got, if I come down here to the bottom of my layer panel, this circle with the white that's broken in half, white and black. If I open that up, I have all of my different adjustment layer options as well. So I'm going to select black and white as my adjustment layer. And whether I do it through the layer menu or through this adjustments panel up here doesn't really matter. I'm just going to add that black and white, and you see that it tosses a layer on top of my image. So now any change I make to this is completely reversible. And when converting an image to black and white, the reason I like this process is that when I select this black and white adjustment layer, I can customize the black and white conversion of my reds, yellows, greens, cyans, blues. I get total control over this image to make the black and white adjustment that I want. So, and the best way, initially I usually need just to sort of pull the sliders around to see what affects what. But as I start doing that, here's my blues. I can kind of open up and control the tone in different parts of my image, the black and white tones. I don't think magenta's going to do a whole ton for me, but red does. I want to blow that out. Slide it down there. Maybe brighten my lights a little bit. I take a look at my cyans and slide those around. I can open up some of the water tones. Blues. So however I go about it, I can convert that image to black and white this way, and then I can flatten it and save it as a grayscale image. And I've got control over all the areas of my photo by doing this. Photoshop guesses as to how to do the conversion. This method allows me to choose how the conversion is made. So that's why I think this is a better process for converting to black and white. While I'm here looking at this black and white adjustment layer, you'll notice that anytime I drop an adjustment layer on top of in my layers panel, I get a layer mask option. And if I go grab a paintbrush or I'll just grab my paintbrush over here and make sure black is my foreground color. I can paint a mask and isolate what areas of my image my filter affects. Let's drop that down. And I'm just going to do this kind of quick, but normally if I really wanted the bridge and the tower to be in color and everything else black and white, I would spend a bit more time kind of painting this mask, but you see that I can paint a mask in to control the areas that are affected by my adjustment layer. Sometimes I can get away with a nice sort of raw, real rough adjustment like this. And by painting that mask in there, I can specify which areas of my image get that black and white filter and which ones don't. Any questions about that so far? It's pretty simple. Also, the other nice thing about adjustment layers is they're completely stackable. So, I can stack as many adjustment layers in here as I need to, and play around with the masking on them, and even the transparency. If here on my layer panel, we've got our color blending modes here, but right next to it's our opacity. I could drop the opacity on my adjustment layer to 0 to turn it, basically hides the effect. But if I drag this back up to say 36, 30, say 50, I can bring some of the original color of the image back in and give myself sort of a muted kind of a tone if I want to. So, you can dial back. And a lot of times what I'll do, especially when I'm using curves and whatnot, which we'll look at here in a minute, I'll go overboard with my initial curve adjustment, but then I'll dial it back with opacity to get it just where I want it to be. So our opacity slider does affect our adjustment layer, and we can mask out areas that we want it to affect. All right. So that's the black and white filter. My only point to this really initially was just to show the black and white conversion by using that filter. But you can get some different effects out of it. So some different interesting blending effects. So I'll just turn that layer off and hide it. And let's move on to, what else we got? What's this? All right, let's use this one. So all I'm really going to go through, so as far as the balance of the adjustment layers go, I'm really only going to look at, from here on, curves, levels, HSB, hue saturation, and then we're going to look at gradient maps out of all this list. Some of these others you can kind of look at on your own. I mean, and they're self-explanatory, and there are very few controls to them. I mean, exposure, will adjust the amount, basically emulate camera exposure within your image. So color balance and, vibrant, selective color. They're very simple controls, can add a little bit of color, bring a little bit of color balance back into images. But, I mean, by my experience, the hue saturation levels and curves give us most all the control we could need over an image. So I'm going to start with this image, which kind of is a little bit dark overall. I'm going to look at levels with this because it's a fairly simple kind of control. And the first thing that we'll see is, again, there's our adjustment layer and a mask. But this actually has a couple of different ways to use it, go about using it. So the histogram will probably be the first thing you notice. There are a lot of tools adjustment layer tools that use a histogram. And basically, what this sets up is the left-hand side are the darks, the right-hand side are the lights. And you can kind of see that this is a dark image overall, and the histogram is loaded up over here on the left-hand side in the dark area, and it tapers off an awful lot as we get into the lights. So if I want to bring up the whites, I'm going to look at this slider knob right here on the right-hand side, and I'm going to slide this over until I get into some tonal areas. So I'm going to kind of overdo it a little bit, but you see if I slide this to the left, I start lightening up the image overall. The one on the far left, if I slide it, will darken my darks. It's already dark enough, I think. I really don't need to adjust that very much. But what I might want to adjust is my midtones. That's the gray one in here in the middle. So if I slide it towards my lights, it's going to darken the midtones. And if I slide it towards the dark, it's going to lighten the midtones. So I can get some decent control that way. And if at any time I want to see what effect that had, all I got to do is come down here to this layer and click the eyeball, turn the layer off. And the few little adjustments that I made had a pretty big impact on the quality of that image overall. Now, I kind of blew out these light areas. I mean, it's usually something you don't want to do. If I go to my window menu and bring up my info panel, I'm just going to tear this off and set it to the side. If I hover my eyedropper over this white area, you'll see that if I look at the CMY slider here, or even the RGB, you'll see that I'm pinning, if I look at here on my RGB on the set of numbers on the right-hand side, you'll see that I'm pinning those out pretty well at 255, which is white. So I've actually eliminated a lot of detail from that area, and that's generally not something that I want to do. So I probably actually want to dial this light back a little bit, and maybe I adjust my mid-tone a little bit in the other direction. And now I'm starting to draw a little bit of detail back into these highlight areas that I didn't have before. So when you're, when you're making adjustments to color, always pay attention to your blacks, that you're not pegging. Like if I put my eyedropper over these black areas, I want to make sure that I'm not driving this set of RGB numbers down to 0, because that would be totally black, and it's not a very realistic kind of a color. Same goes for whites. 255, if I peg those over to 255, I'm blowing out detail. So I want to watch that. So you can kind of go by eye and kind of go by the numbers. And you should probably always check the shadows and the highlights to make sure you're not compromising them as you make these adjustments. But so with levels, that's the simplest way to work with that. You can also work with individual color channels if you want. And I can select my green channel, slide this over, and it really kind of starts affecting the color. But I usually don't have a need, so. The other way you can work with these as well is with these eyedroppers. The bottom is your highlights, the middle is your midtones, the top are your darks. So if I want to, I'll just turn this one off. I'm going to create another levels option. I could select my, say my blacks, and select an area that I want to represent my darkest darks. That probably wasn't great. Maybe I go down here into this dark area. That kind of darkens up my blacks a little bit. Grab my white eyedropper, my lights, and I could pick either this area right here, or I could, I could pick anywhere I want to get sort of a really kind of blown out kind of effect. But you can use the eyedroppers as well if you want. I just always stick to the histogram and the sliders, and those always give me the results I need. So levels are a fairly simple, basic kind of a color adjustment option, and work pretty well in most cases, honestly. So the next one to move on to, let's see, levels. I'm going to look at curves. For color adjustment, I generally tend to like curves the most because I've kind of come to understand them. Most people, when they start working with color adjustment, you don't really understand curves very well, so you avoid it because you're not really sure what it's doing. But once you understand, how to make them work, they do a nice job. So I'm going to stick with the same image, and I've turned off my two level adjustment layers. I'm just going to work with curves. If I click, I'm just looking at RGB, I'm looking at this all holistically. If I click right in the middle, it adds a little knot there. And if I pull it up, it's going to lighten my image overall. Pull it down, it'll darken my image overall. And I can kind of slide this knot, see the little knot I made? I can click on that and slide it along this line. If I slide it up to the right, it's going to affect my highlights more. See how it changes the slope of the curve? And if I slide it down here, it's going to darken my blacks a little bit more. So I can kind of make quick overall adjustments very easily and very quickly by clicking and adjusting that curve. So what's nice is that I can go up here. Let's say that, let's say I want to lighten this area a little bit. I'm not 100% sure where this area lives on this curve. But one thing I can do is go up here to this set of tools on the side. There's this little hand. If I click on that and come down here into this sleeve area and click and then slide up to lighten this area, you see over on the histogram on my curve panel, the point that it put in. I can adjust the color just in that one area, but it's showing me right where that color lives on the spline. And I can kind of work through my image that way if I want. If I want to, darken up this area, say, not that. Let's go grab this, Click over here, slide it down. That adds another knot to that line. But I can select specific areas of my image to adjust and do it with that little hand. And that places these little knots on the spline, and then I can go back in and make further adjustments manually if I want to. So, you know, it is, I mean, I could slide this furthest right point over a little bit just to kind of affect the output, but that actually does a halfway decent job. So with curves, I can adjust that way. The other value in curves is that I'm working in RGB color mode, and if I'm looking at this image and I decide that, you know what, it looks rather yellow. You know, we'll see that a lot. We'll have a photo that has kind of a yellow cast to it. Remember that RGB always directly relates to CMY on each of the color spectrums. So if I have too much yellow, and if a photo is too yellow overall, CMY, I count, you know, down the chain. If I RGB, the blue channel, making adjustments only to the blue channel, will remove a yellow cast from an image. So, I'll undo all that. Oops. So, this isn't necessarily yellow overall, but I'll show you what I mean. If I go grab my blue channel and only make an adjustment here, I can start pulling some of the yellow out of this image by just adjusting the blue channel. I can add yellow back into the image, which is actually kind of turning it green overall. But I can make adjustments that way. So if my photo has a yellowish cast to it, my blue channel will be what does the trick. And just, you know, write CMY across the top, RGB right underneath it, and that's how you can tell which channel affects which color. So, you know, if it's too blue, if my photo's too blue, adjusting the red channel will help affect that. If it's too red, you know, too magenta or too red, adjusting my green channel can fix that. And if it's too yellow, adjusting my blue channel can fix it. So those do directly relate to each other. So color channels, I think, work very well for quick overall adjustments, or color curves, I should say. There are also presets, just like anything. I can make it, you know, apply presets to it for different things, but lighten it up overall. Curves did a pretty nice job there. I actually think it did a nicer job than my levels did. So those are curves. Now I'm going to switch images. Grab this fellow. So the next that I'm going to look at is HSB, hue, saturation, brightness. And that would be this one right here at the top, hue and saturation. So I'm going to use hue and saturation to brighten an image overall. So I can use, you know, I can use my saturation option here to overly saturate the colors in my image, or to kind of mute them. But that's not what I'm going to use them for here. What if I want to change just the color of the shirt on this guy? I can change the color of the shirt by going up here to my hue scale and sliding it whichever direction I want. So I got the slight teal right now. Maybe I want to go to something a little more blue. But look what happens to the rest of my image. That hue adjustment that I'm making is affecting everything. So there's a couple of ways that I can fix this. So undo that. The first is I can identify this blue as being the only color that I want to adjust. And the way I do that is go up here to this little hand tool again, select it, come down here, and I'm going to click in this blue shirt and watch this color, this hue spectrum down here along the bottom of this channel or this panel. When I click in this blue area, it puts markers within this color spectrum. And basically what it's doing, what it's saying is any changes I make up here are only going to affect colors within this range. So now if I go and change the color of my shirt, I can change the color of blue, and it does not affect the rest of my image. I can go this way. Let's just go up here and kind of, let's make that purple. Now, the further I go, it does start to affect, you can see in the background, it is affecting it a little bit. But we have other ways we can take care of that as well. I'm just going to pump this up to purple here. Purplish blue. So I can adjust these ranges down here. If I click on this little white line, I can open this up wider. And this little arrow right here, I can slide over a bit more. But if you watch, the further I slide it, the bigger the impact on the overall image. So I just want to stay back here where it was, I think. Maybe open it up just a touch. But I can isolate specific areas fairly easily this way. And maybe I want it to be a little bit darker, or I want to, I can adjust, that just adjusted the color of it. Saturation will adjust the brightness of that color. I can sort of mute it back, or I can pump it up. And the lightness of it. I can darken that color up, or I can brighten it up. So you see I get quite a bit of control over changing just the color of the guy's shirt. A very common thing to need to do in the graphic design field is color adjustments of specific elements. So this is the easiest way to do it. I mean, and you can even match this to a specific color, match it to a specific PMS color if you want to. But I'm just going to make those adjustments. So this would be my blue shirt. And I could create another, turn that one off, create another hue saturation channel. Again, go back in here, select that. Maybe this one I make, I don't know, I get some funky things when I get down here into this lime green area, but I can adjust my saturation and the lightness overall to kind of bring that back some. So I can convert that to green. Yeah, it's okay. It's not half bad. But I can make adjustments. So, you know, change the color of cars, change the colors of toolboxes, you know. Stanley Cup mugs, I mean, but HSB, if you need to change colors of objects within an image, HSB is the general way you do that, is using that particular adjustment layer. I can also kind of, again, you know, I mean, I've got this mask available. I can kind of, if I grab my paintbrush or maybe my gradient tool, grab my gradient tool and maybe do I can mask out the effect of that adjustment layer at the bottom, sort of fade it in at the top for a multicolored kind of a thing. So that's HSB. And HSB, curves, levels. All right, and my last one is gradient map. And I only show gradient map because this is a kind of a fun way to get some kind of neat color effects. So I'm going to open up this one, this file. All right. So I've got this girl, and I'm just going to really quickly isolate her. So I'm just going to go over and grab my object selection tool, select her. I'm going to select and mask. And then I need to fix this mask a little bit. So grab this. My option key. Oops. And do that. All right, so I kind of quickly masked her out. I also want to so quickly mask her out and say okay, and then I'm just going to duplicate her. Duplicate that layer and create a mask. All right, so I've got her isolated. So I'm going to go up here and grab my gradient map. Oh, I know why I did that. All right. All right, and what gradient map is going to do, I was messing around with this earlier, so what a gradient map is going to do is it's going to replace my darks with one color and my lights with another color. So with this gradient map selected, I'm just going to click in here and I'm just going to go grab, I'm going to look at purples, the different colors available here. I'll grab blue and like a blue and red, pink maybe. Say okay. So you can see that it's replaced all of my lights with the blue and all of my darks with this purple color. And those are kind of extreme, not really what I want. Plus, it's affecting my image overall, and that's also not really what I want. So I isolated this girl so that I could just make the color change on the background maybe. So I'm just going to grab this layer and slide it between the two of them. And now if I open up this gradient, I'm going to darken the purple color, and I'm going to brighten the blue. So maybe that's not actually what I want to make it a joke. Let's say okay. We'll pull it back up above her. And then if I hold down my Option key, I can make a clipping mask out of the lower layer. So you see I can apply a color ramp to the image. Like I said, all the color ramp did was replaced all the darks, the shadow areas, with that dark purple, and replaced the whites or the lights with that blue. So maybe that's, I mean, I don't know. It's a little flat looking, but I could go back into my adjustments and I could grab a levels adjustment layer too. As long as I have this little arrow, it's clipped to only this layer. And I'm going to brighten up my lights, and I'm going to darken my shadows. So you see, by combining these two layers, the adjustment layers, I can kind of build on an effect. That. Maybe my midtones, need to darken them up a little bit maybe. But either way, I've applied kind of a nice duotone effect, but it's in full color. And maybe I don't like that. Maybe I'm not sure if I like that color set anymore or not. I could try, try a different gradient map on this. Let's look at the pinks. Let's try that. That's kind of interesting. In this case, I replaced all my darks with this real light color. It's giving me kind of an X-ray effect. But I can flip this around by simply sliding the color sliders around. And kind of give that effect. But you really just got to kind of play with them a little bit to see, what effect you get. Oh, right there. So some interesting color kinds of effects we can get with these. But we can stack all of these adjustments as much as we want to kind of customize the effect we're looking for. Maybe on this one I drop its opacity back a little bit, 50%. Maybe that works better. And again, we can, isolate different areas. So maybe leave her face alone. Well, we can do that, so. Disable this. So, I mean, color adjustment is something you just kind of work with. You got to really kind of play around with them though. Whenever you have something to adjust, take it too far. I mean, just to see what you're going to get, because it's usually a worthwhile thing to do to kind of learn how everything works. Maybe this becomes. Can make some interesting color combinations or interesting effects of stuff. But, so like I said, I wasn't going to go through all of them. That set of 4 give you pretty much everything you need for color correction, I think. The nice thing about HSB and curves specifically is when we get into Premiere and After Effects, if we want to do color grading, HSB and curves are 2 very strong color adjustment options in After Effects. The Lumetri color plugin relies heavily on those. So, but they all behave the same, which is nice.